Good evening all, and welcome to my 70k special. I just would like to say thank you to each and every one of you for subscribing and listening every night. You guys are what makes doing this possible, and I am incredibly grateful for your continued support. And I am so humbled by the amount of you guys that enjoy my content. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I am also very fortunate tonight to be joined by my incredible sensei, Killer Orange Cat. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was around 5 or 6, we were living in a rented house that seemed normal enough. But strange things started to happen shortly after we moved in. My older brother liked doing these huge 500-piece puzzles that he would put them together on the floor of our bedroom, and they started getting messed up during the night. Everyone naturally assumed it was me, but it wasn't. Not long after that began, I started to have really bad nightmares about a woman in her early 20s. She was in a white cotton nightgown with violet flowers on it. She had very long, wavy, tangled black hair and was swaying from the ceiling light, and she would stare at me with a look of pure hatred. It got so bad that my parents took me to a therapist who said I was having night terrors. About a month after the night terrors started, we moved to another house suddenly. My parents claimed it was because they found a house closer to my father's work, and just like that, the night terrors stopped, and my brother's puzzles were being left intact. It wasn't until 15 years later, while visiting the family, that I discovered the truth. My mother was talking to one of our neighbours about my night terrors, and said that another family with a little girl rented the place a few years before us. She had the exact same night terrors, right down to the nightgown with the pretty purple flowers. The neighbour also mentioned that no one seemed to stay in that house for more than a year. My mum thought it was too much of a coincidence, so she started asking around and found out from an elderly couple in the neighbourhood that a young woman had killed herself in the house in the early 60s, as my experience took place in the early 80s. My mother went to the library and looked through the microfiche and found the news articles. It turns out that the girl in her early 20s had mental health issues and was being cared for by her parents, had gone into my bedroom in the middle of the night and hung herself from the ceiling light. I never got to see the picture that they had of the girl in the paper, but my mum said she had very long black wavy hair, and I'll never forget those eyes burning through me and her face distorted in silent rage.
As a kid, I was usually pretty paranoid and scared of all the usual stuff, if not more. Due to my parents liking to mess with my brother and I, and trying to scare us with scary stories that were supposedly true. There were 2 incidents that happened to me that to this day I do not know if they really happened, or if it was just my paranoid brain fucking with me. Before getting into one of these stories, I have to try and describe the basic layout of my house. It was an older, tract-style home built on a large lot. So it had a full driveway along with a detached garage. Following the driveway, there was a steel fence that was linked from the garage to the main house. In order to get entrance to the house, you would first have to open the gate and walk through the front yard. Also would have to pass my 60-pound lab, who was not friendly to people he did not know. Surrounding the house was another fence that was part brick and part wood, depending on the area that it encompassed. But no matter how you went about getting to the main part of the house, you first had to jump a fence and get past my dog. The inside setup was basic. Walking through the front door would have you facing a large living room, and around 30 feet to your left, past the kitchen, was the main hallway that linked all the bedrooms together. If you were to walk into the hallway, you would have the master bedroom at the right, and to your left there was a long, narrow stretch of walls on both sides that led to the 2 other bedrooms. In the middle of the hallway was a closet used for linen, no larger than a normal closet, but large enough where it required its own light. Moving on. The one that freaks me out the most took place when I was 16 and was left home alone for a week while my parents went to Cancun. I had my first job at the time and was not able to get time off. The job required me to work the closing shift, which would usually end around 12 a.m., and by the time I rode my bike home, it was close to 12:30 a.m. So this one night, I get home, and as I am walking through the front gate, I get a weird feeling, and nothing terrifying, but a feeling like I shouldn't be there. My dog greeted me at the gate and seemed to be in his regular friendly and playful mood, so I dismissed the fear as just being paranoid and started to head inside. As I started to open the front door, I again got that weird feeling in my stomach, like something was twisting the inside and telling me, "Don't go in." I was tired and wanted to wake up early, so by that point, I again dismissed the feeling and went all the way inside. When I entered, I heard a noise coming from the back of the house that sounded like a thump. I froze for a second and then flipped on the main light to the living room. This still left the kitchen and hallway in semi-dark. As soon as I flipped the light on, I saw what can only be described as a midget shadow-sized figure run from the master bedroom into the darker part of the hallway towards the 2 other rooms, one of which was mine. I still stood there at the front door, frozen and unsure of what to do. Did I really just see that, or was I being paranoid? I decided I was being paranoid, but did not want to chance it. I ran out to the garage and grabbed my dad's crowbar and his 6D battery mag light. After prepping myself, I started to head back into the house, but did not want to do so alone, so I called for my dog, but he strangely declined. Usually, he loved coming in the house and sleeping in my room. I tried pulling him by the collar to get him at least part way inside, but it was like dragging 60 pounds of dead weight, and not wanting to hurt or choke him, I let him be. So alone, I went back in the house to check everything and make sure no one was in there. I first did a basic scan of the living room and kitchen. Everything was fine, windows locked and everything in order, so I moved on to the hallway and ventured into the master bedroom. Nothing there, and windows closed and locked. I still kept getting a weird feeling in my stomach and felt like running out of the house, but I was already too far in to stop, so I made my way down the hallway and to the linen closet. I raised my crowbar, ready to hit anything that jumped out at me as I reached for the doorknob, but happily there was nothing in there, so I switched the light on to do a more thorough look, and then off again and closed the door. My heart was racing fast now, and I could feel my heartbeats, and my blood was flowing to my head as I crept towards the remaining 2 bedrooms. The first of the last 2 rooms was empty and just had nothing out of the norm. Windows in check and closet empty. Now, came the last room. My room. The house was silent, and I could hear myself breathe as I went in. I figured that if something was in the house, then it had to be in my room, since this was the only place left. I entered, and I quickly lunged for the light switch to switch it on, and then turned around, fully expecting to have to defend myself from the shadowy figure I'd seen earlier. But nothing. I was puzzled, but relieved at the same time. Nothing there. So it had been my imagination. Cool. Time to grab some food and then go to sleep. I threw my 2 weapons onto my bed and headed out into the hallway to go to the kitchen. I felt good now. Nothing scary here, just my imagination. Rooms were empty, and my dog was just being paranoid because of me. But then, I noticed something as I was walking through the hallway. I could see the outline of my linen closet in the darkness from the light that was on inside the closet. I had turned it off when I left. I know I did, because it makes a loud clicking when it goes off. But now it was on. By itself? Fuck that. I grabbed my keys and ran towards the front door, got outside, locked the door, grabbed my dog, and ran out to the driveway. I stood there for a little while and contemplated going back in, but was scared shitless and walked to my friend's house instead. Spent the night there, and in the morning, when there was light, I went home. When I got back inside the house, everything was normal, and the light was no longer on. I rescanned the house, and nothing was out of place, and no forced windows or unlocked doors. Chalked it up to being paranoid, but for the rest of the week, I slept either in the living room or at my friend's place. The weirder part was, when I talked to my dad and my mom years later, they both had stories of seeing shadowy figures when they were younger. In one case, my mom even mentioned one jumping at her from a tree and chasing her down the street until she hit the lighted part of the city.
About 2 years ago, I was renting a house with my 2 friends. The house was incredibly old and had a wood stove and no furnace, and was pretty creepy at night. We lived off a dirt road with 2 or 3 other houses. So one night, at around 4 in the morning, I woke up to my friend coming home from work. He worked the night shift, and I heard him flush the toilet, and it kind of stirs me out of sleeping. I groggily opened my eyes and looked around my room. I noticed my bedroom door is still closed, but I see a man standing in between my bed and the TV. I lived in a pretty small room, so the distance between my bed and the TV, maybe 3 to 5 feet at most. I kept a fan running throughout the night between the bed and the TV, just to help me relax at night, and obviously to stay cool. I look at the guy, and he's just standing there. He's wearing a baseball cap, and it's down kind of low so I can't see his face. I notice he's wearing a grey hoodie, with his hands in the pouch, and wearing khaki shorts. I blink at him a few times, and say, "Hey." I get no response, so thinking it may have been my roommate's friend trying to play a prank, I speak to him again. "What's up, man? I'm trying to sleep, get out." He just stands there, hands in the hoodie pouch, shifts his weight a little bit, but still stands in the same spot, just staring at me. I get a little freaked out after seeing him move slightly, so being the pussy I am, I let out a scream and grabbed my pillow. When I turn back to swing my pillow at him, the guy vanishes. After sitting there dumbfounded for about 5 minutes, I realized the guy was standing exactly where my fan sits in my room. All my windows were closed, and my door never budged. It still freaks me out to this day.
In my childhood home, I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs early in the mornings. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home, and it wouldn't be uncommon to wake up in the morning to hear Mom typing away at the computer. One day, I got up and called out to Mom, assuming she was down there working, as I could hear typing. No answer. No one was down there at all. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening regularly. I figured I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was hearing things that weren't there, so I didn't mention anything to anyone, figuring I was going a bit crazy. This happened on and off over a period of 6 months. The sound of fast typing and fast, furious clicking of a mouse, as if someone was frustrated. One morning, I was eating my breakfast when I heard Mom at the top of the stairs call out to me, "You're not down there on that computer already?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she had heard it too. She was convinced she could hear typing, yet no one was there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and then my sister opened up about hearing it regularly too, when no one was down there. I wasn't crazy after all. I set out to try and catch whatever it was causing it, and tried to discover a rational explanation for it. I'd sprint out of my bedroom to the top of the stairs, where I was able to look down into the room to see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there, it stopped. I think it went on for a couple of years, and we learned just to kind of live with it, as it wasn't every day. I was down there once when the ceiling light globe in the center of the room began flashing very fast, strobe-like. It then exploded, and glass went shattering all across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when it started happening because I was scared, the whole mysterious typing, you know. If I hadn't ran, I would have been hit with bits of light bulb. Around that same time, I was on the computer at home by myself, when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard this really sharp intake of breath directly behind my right shoulder, near my ear. I've never ran so fast in my life and was hesitant going in that room ever again. Prior to that, the whole typing thing had just been something weird and a bit spooky, and not scary. Still makes my heart race when I think about it today. Have never really encountered anything like this before or since all those events. I don't particularly believe in ghosts either, but I'm open to the possibilities of something in which scientists don't have a proper explanation for yet.
My name is Alyssa, and I am sharing with you a very personal story of mine. I can honest to God, right hand on the Bible, say that everything you are about to hear is 100% true. I know everyone who says that makes it kind of hard to believe, but I wish I was just making up a story purely for attention. But these things I am going to tell you truly happened to me when I was younger. I never fully believed in ghosts or anything like that, because I had never witnessed anything paranormal with my own 2 eyes. So I always had my doubts. I wasn't a total unbeliever, but I suppose you could have considered me a skeptic. But all of that changed when I had to live in a house where I was terrorized by spirits. I've always been very into the paranormal world because it's always piqued my interest, especially when you're listening to other people's ghost stories or watching a scary ghost movie on the TV. It's all very cool to hear when it's not your own story, and it's not you personally having the terrifying things happen to you. I never talk about this to anyone because I hate having to relive the nightmare and pure hell I went through every day while living in an old house of mine. This wasn't easy for me. It sounds silly, but until you have experienced the absolute terror and fear of living in an extremely active house, you won't ever know just how much it can take a toll on someone. I lived in a small 3-bedroom house here in a small little town by the name of Troy in Missouri. It's just a small, out in the middle of nowhere little city. Everyone pretty much knew everyone. Rumors would usually spread very quickly in high school. Just one of those kind of towns. We had a cute little house that was on the corner of Main Street. When you walked out the front door and stepped onto the porch, the nice view you got with a massive town's cemetery right smack dab across the street from our house. So you can only imagine the first thought that came to my mind when we pulled up to the house that we were going to move into. When I saw that the cemetery was no more than 30 steps from our front yard, I thought, great, this place is most definitely haunted. Although at the time, I was just joking with myself. But the cuteness and coziness of the home itself was enough to get my mind off even possibly being haunted. I finally had my own bedroom, after living with my grandma and grandpa at their small cramped house. My sister and I had to share a room over there, as well as with numerous previous houses we lived in. We always shared a room with each other. She is almost 8 years older than I, so I had absolutely no say or had any part in decorating our bedroom. She was the oldest, so she made the rules for how the room should look. She didn't want my Paranormal, Papa Roach and Linkin Park posters plastered over the wall. So I had to settle with Lil Wayne, John Cena, and Jersey Shore pictures all over for years. Definitely not my sort of taste in music or television, but we finally had our own bedrooms, so I could actually decorate and have my room the way that I wanted. And nobody could tell me that I couldn't have the things I wanted on my own walls and whatnot. That, and I finally had my own privacy, and my own personal area I could go to when I felt I needed to escape or distance myself from my family. It was nice at first. We all seemed to be pretty content with the house and how things were coming along. It was about a week or two after we moved into the house that something weird began to happen. My room was all set up how I wanted. My parents had just finished hanging pictures on the wall and painting and making last-minute adjustments to the place, making it look all nice, and tried to make it feel as much like home as possible. I had come home from school one afternoon, and my parents had both worked together in a big warehouse-type place at the time, so they worked awful hours. They were usually home by the time dinner needed to start being made, but I almost always came home from school to an empty home. I would generally be home alone for a few hours until both my parents came home, or at least until my older sister came home from being out with her friends and partying the night before. I remember one specific day when I came home from school alone. I put my school bag down on the back of the kitchen chairs and went to the fridge to look for something to eat. I went and sat on the couch in the living room and turned on the television and just sat and relaxed for a few minutes, watching whatever stupid reality show I was into around that time, and snacked on my chips. I remember feeling like there was someone watching me from across the room, like as if someone was standing in the corner of the living room, just staring at me. I don't know what it was, but something was urging me to look over in the direction of where I felt this presence. I heard a voice yell in the back of my head, "Look at me." But it wasn't my voice. So when I finally gained the courage to look over that way, I saw these terrifying two glowing red eyes from the shadows, just looking at me. I was so afraid that I was paralyzed from fear. I couldn't talk. I couldn't scream as I wanted to. I couldn't do anything but just stare back at whatever was staring at me. I had never felt that kind of pure, intense fear, to where I was literally paralyzed. It couldn't have been more than 10 to 15 seconds that I was looking at those red eyes from the dark corner, but it felt like hours. I finally pried myself off the couch and sprinted down the hallway into my bedroom, locked the door, and called my mother's cell phone at work. She tried to calm me down as best she could, with just her voice over the phone. But when she realized I was genuinely terrified and sobbing like a damn baby, she told me that her and Dad would wrap up at work and head home. So I stayed locked up in my bedroom until they both arrived 45 minutes later. Little did I know that this was simply the beginning of our story. It was about a month after that incident that I came home from school, yet again all alone, and I had already almost forgotten about what had happened just weeks before, being wrapped up in piles of homework, trying to catch up on my assignments and everything else. It was just kind of pushed into the back of my mind. I sat at the dining room table and was playing games on my laptop when I heard what sounded like my mum's voice calling out my name from downstairs in the basement. I was super confused because I thought she was at work. In fact, I knew she was at work. So I carefully and cautiously got up from the table and inched my way around the corner to where the basement stairs are off the dining room, around the corner a little bit. I then heard my mum again call out my name, "Alyssa." But this time it sounded like she was struggling with something, like she needed help carrying laundry baskets up the stairs or something. She just had a sound in her tone of voice, as in that she needed assistance. So I walked down the first couple of steps to where I could kind of peek around the corner to verify if anyone was actually down there. Something just felt off about the voice. Even though it was clearly my mother's voice, every single hair on my body was standing straight on end. I think it knew that something was wrong. I just had a really weird feeling about the situation, and to my shock, I saw nobody down there at all. I booked it back up the steps, grabbed the house phone and ran out the back door. I stood at the end of the driveway and called my dad's cell phone. My heart sank into the depths of my stomach when I heard my mother answer his phone. "Hey sweetie, what's up?" she asked me. I literally remember feeling as if I was almost ready to throw up. I was so scared. If I was actually talking to my mother on the phone, then who was calling my name from the basement? Why did it just sound like my mum? Or what would I have seen if I actually went all the way down the stairs fully? After that experience, I was way too scared to come home from school and be alone after that. So for the next few weeks, my parents had my grandma, who lived a few neighborhoods over, come pick me up from school every day, and either stayed at the house with me until my parents came home, or brought me over to her house where her and my dad would pick me up from over there when they got off work. I felt so much better and much calmer when I had someone there with me in that scary ass house. I didn't feel like anything was there when someone else was there with me. It was almost like whatever was in the house, like scaring me when I was alone and vulnerable. But one day, my grandma wasn't able to pick me up from school because she was a nurse and had gotten called into work at the emergency room. So I found myself all alone in that house until my parents got off work. I don't remember anything that happened that day, but I was most definitely on edge the whole time, waiting on my parents to pull up to the driveway. One night I was sleeping, and I was awoken up out of a dead, deep sleep for some unknown reason. I sat up in my bed, stretched out a little bit and rubbed my eyes. I looked over at my alarm clock and remember it being somewhere around 3:20 a.m. I was so confused as to why I was awake at this god-awful hour of the night. So I sat up at the edge of my bed and was going to go to the kitchen to get something to drink and then go right back to bed. When I was about to stand up and walk out of my bedroom, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps walking up and down the hallway. The whole hallway and kitchen was all hardwood floors, and it sounded like big heavy boots were walking just back and forth from my bedroom door, down to my parents' bedroom, and then back to mine again. It steadily did this for about 2 minutes. I was trying to figure out why one of my parents were awake, and why they were just walking back and forth through the house at such hours of the night. When I got to my bedroom door and went to reach and open the door, I shit you not, my door handle began shaking, like someone was trying to open the door, but it was locked in the handle, jiggling the door handle and jiggling it very violently, causing the entire door to rattle. It scared the absolute hell out of me, and I jumped back and shrieked. I guess my mum, who was the heaviest sleeper in the world, heard me and ran to check what was wrong. I told her what was happening, and she just shrugged it off and tried telling me I was half asleep and that everything was fine, that I was just imagining things. But I know I wasn't imagining things. I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and of course no one believed me. She wasn't awake to hear what I heard, and it made me really angry to know that she did not believe me when I explained it to her. The activity after that died down for a long time. It was so nice to come home and not have to worry about something creepy happening to me. I was beginning to think I was starting to go crazy, since I had experienced what I previously did. and then nothing else had happened after. I was comfortable in my own home. I actually felt safe being there. But all that changed pretty quickly. It was like, just as soon as I thought it was all over, it came back with a vengeance, stronger than it was before. I was taking a shower one evening, and my mother was downstairs doing laundry, and my dad was out in the garage working on his car. I had the bathroom door completely shut, and nobody would have just walked in on me in the shower anyway, with there being only one bathroom in the house. If anyone needed to relieve themselves during my shower time, they would have knocked first before waltzing right on in there. I was just about done showering when I felt a really cold breeze zip past me. It was such a strong breeze that I remember the shower curtain actually moved, as if someone opened up the bathroom door and then shut it really fast, and the wind of the doors closing waved the curtains a little bit. But when I peeked out into the bathroom, no one was there. I hurried up and finished up in there, but I got that immediate feeling of being watched once again. As I went to bend down to shut off the water, I heard this really deep, super creepy, masculine cackle-like laugh, and it was the scariest thing I've heard in my entire life. My whole body was covered in goosebumps. I ran out of there with just a towel wrapped around my body and went straight across the hall into my bedroom. All I could do was sit there and just cry. I literally was beginning to feel like I was going crazy at this point. Nobody believed me, and I was the only one experiencing this shit. Whatever was in the house was targeting me, and only me. I didn't understand why this was all happening to me, but all I wanted was for it to stop. I hated being in that house all alone, and I didn't want to have this shit happen to me anymore. I was tired of it. I was starting to go into this really deep depression, and I felt so alone. So, I had a friend stay a few nights with me one weekend, and I had told her a lot about what had been going on since I moved in, and she wanted to see what I was talking about. She believed me, but she wanted to see it for herself. She was super into ghosts and the spirit world. I was just really worried that whatever this thing was, wasn't going to do anything while she was here with me, and for her to believe that I was crazy too. We cuddled up together on the living room couch. My parents had gone out with some friends this night in particular, and my sister wasn't there. My two brothers were with my grandma, so it was just my friend and I alone in the house. I remember we were watching the new remake of Friday the 13th. We had a big bowl of popcorn right between us, and I remember the part had come on the movie, and it was a bit of a jump scare. My friend jumped so hard, the entire bowl of popcorn went everywhere. We laughed about it for a solid 5 minutes, and then I went to grab the trash bag and clean up the big pieces while she went to fetch the vacuum cleaner. I didn't see it in the hall closet where it usually was, so I told her it might be downstairs, since my mom was doing some cleaning earlier that morning. So she went downstairs to go look for it, and not even 10 seconds after she'd gone downstairs, I heard her scream. She sprinted up the stairs, and I was standing at the top of the stairs, wondering what she was screaming for, and she ran right into me. She was running so fast up the stairs, she had tears streaming down her face, and I could see the pure terror and just sheer fear in her eyes. I asked her what the hell happened, and what she told me sent chills down my spine. Still to this day, just as I recount this, it gives me goosebumps. She told me she was looking for the vacuum, and when she went to grab it, she heard something in the other part of the basement. So, she went to peek around the corner to see what it was, and she told me she looked around the corner and she saw this thick, black, misty, smoky, human-like figure just floating a few inches off the ground in the back corner of the basement. She said it had absolutely no facial features, but it looked like a normal full-body apparition. It had a head, upper and lower body, legs, and everything a human should have, except no facial features whatsoever. And it just kind of hovered, but it was more like a mist that you could see through. She said when she blinked, it literally vaporized into thin air and vanished. She was so scared, and that's when I heard her scream, and then she ran up the stairs. I just looked at her and told her, this is exactly what I was telling you about. I told her that I was so sorry it happened to her, and that if she wanted to go home, that she could, and I would completely understand. She said no, and that she didn't want to leave me alone after the ordeal. So we kind of just toughed out the rest of the night together, and hid in my bedroom with the door shut and turned the TV off. That night when it was time for bed, we lay down together on my bed and started to drift off to sleep. Somehow, we both woke up and shot up out of bed at the exact same time, from the both of us hearing a weird noise coming from outside my bedroom window. We both just looked at each other, and she said, "Did you hear that?" I nodded my head, "Yeah," and we got up out of bed and walked towards the window. What we both heard sounded like a super creepy growling sound. It sounded totally inhuman. It was completely evil. It was a noise that you can only imagine coming from a warthog, and kind of like a lion's roar. I don't even know what words to use that could have described just exactly what we heard, but I pulled my curtain back from the window, and we both peered out into the dark night. What we both saw will forever stick with her and I until the day we die. There was a really weird looking stick-type figure. Thing. That's the best way I can describe what it looked like. It was tall, lanky, all black. The way it walked across the street under the glow of the streetlight was very eerie. It took the biggest steps each time it moved, and it was sort of like a cartoonish type movement. Like when a cartoon character tiptoes to sneak up on someone and it takes super wide and totally non-realistic giant steps. That's how this thing was walking across the street. It looked like just a tall, big, thin, squiggly electrical figure. It was by far the craziest thing we've ever seen. We hid back in the bed and didn't come out from under the covers until morning. We still to this day have absolutely no idea what the hell we were looking at that night. Her and I are still very much close friends, and when we hang out together and talk about old memories, if that house is brought up in conversation, we always remember that creature-like thing we saw walking into the cemetery that one night. And even though we can joke and laugh about it now, it still gives us the chills just thinking back to that terrifying night we experienced all of that together. Now that we're much older, we've actually sat down and tried to debunk what we've seen, and we've tried so hard to make sense of it, and we just can't. No matter what we try to trick ourselves we could have seen, we both know exactly what it was and what it was not. Living in that house for the entire year and a half that I did was absolute hell for me. I have been scratched, pushed, had my hair pulled. I woke up in the middle of the night with a burning sensation on my leg, and when I pulled the blanket back to see what was hurting, I could clearly see a bite mark on my ankle. And it wasn't a normal bite mark pattern either. Whatever actually physically bit me very hard and sharp with jagged teeth. The indentations in my skin were just tiny little dots in the shape of a pattern of teeth, like an actual bite mark. So, to even try imagining the things my friend saw in the basement, but with super sharp and pointy teeth, absolutely terrifies me to the core. We moved out of that house after living there for 1.5 years. There was one evening, it was a Sunday dinner, and we were having it at my grandparents' house. And somehow, that house got brought up in conversation over the dinner table, and I asked my mum if she remembers the day I called her and asked her about the voice I heard coming from the basement, that it sounded just like her voice calling my name. And she immediately went so pale in the face. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "Yeah, I do remember that, and I'm sorry for telling you I didn't believe you all those times." I asked her what exactly she meant, and she told me that one day she was sitting at the dinner room table, at the computer, and she heard exactly what sounded like her father's voice, calling her from the basement. She said she heard his voice very distinct and raspy yell, "Stacy!" from down there, while she was all alone in the house one day. She never told me about it when we lived there, and she continued to tell me all about her own personal experiences she had in that house. It made me so mad, because everyone in that house literally made me feel like I was going crazy, because I thought I was the only one experiencing the shit happening in that house. But my mum was having the exact same stuff happen to her. She just never told me, because she didn't want to scare me any more than I already had been. So she just left it alone and never told anyone about it, until years later. I'm now 21, and I still think about this house from time to time. This is the most I've thought about it in a very long time now, and it's almost like every time I bring it up, I get such an off feeling. I don't know how to describe it, but I hate talking about that place. I never had anything paranormal happen to me before moving into that house. I experienced a whole new level of belief after living in that portal to hell. I still drive by it from time to time, and every time I do, it's almost always put back up for rent. People don't stay there any longer than 3 to 6 months, so I guess whatever terrorized me as a kid is still lingering around there to this day.
This happened over a decade ago. I was living alone in a ground floor apartment. I had gone to bed for the evening, but was never a good sleeper, so laying down around 12 and getting to sleep around 2 was pretty good. I had been actually asleep, a small miracle for me, when I was jolted fully awake by a crash from the next room, which was the kitchen. My apartment was the kind in a large open complex, where the doors opened to the outside. Not a big building, and it was a nice neighborhood, very quiet, especially at night. There was usually nothing I could hear from my bedroom, so the crash just ripped through complete silence. I had 2 cats, and at first I assumed they were chasing each other around and had knocked something over, so I started to get up to scold them. But I couldn't pull the blanket back because they were both laying on it, huddled together, against my hip, terrified. Huge dilated eyes, ears pinned flat back, puffed up like they've been electrocuted. These were adult animals that had moved thousands of miles with me and lived in all kinds of situations, with huge dogs and third shift workers and all kinds of commotion. They were not easily frightened, and I'd never seen them like that before, or since. I still have one, and the other just passed away. and that bothered me more than the noise. Anyway, as disturbed as I was actually angrier that I had been woken from a restful sleep, and I got up to investigate without a thought for safety. Unarmed and nearly naked, I marched across the room and the hall to the kitchen in the dark, and then I flipped on the light. I almost wish I had found a burglar. My kitchen was small. The sink was opposite the stove, and there was about 8 feet between them. I kept a dish drainer rack sat on a folded dishcloth next to the sink, snugged back against the wall. When I went to bed that night, there had been a ceramic bowl, a couple pieces of silverware, and a plastic food storage container in it. Now, it and all of its contents were scattered at the foot of the stove, the bowl broken. The dish towel had only made it halfway and laid directly in the center of the kitchen floor. I can still see it in my mind like a photograph. The dish drainer had launched itself, or been thrown or shoved, clear across the kitchen, and with some considerable force. The crash I heard was it hitting the stove, probably still full, as the bowl looked like it broke when it hit the floor, right there at the base of the oven. I wasn't angry anymore. Now I was just confused and suddenly very aware of how late it was, and that I had to get up for work in the morning. I picked up the dish rack and set it on the counter nearest where I stood in the entryway, collected the rest of the mess, and heaped it inside the rack, shut the light, and returned to my bed. My cats were still huddled, but looked to have regained command of themselves. I remember laying down and falling back into a fitful sleep for a few hours before waking up in the morning, hoping that I had dreamed the whole thing. I found the dish rack and the mess right where I had left it, of course. I was raised to be very skeptical, in a secular, blue-collar household, where ascribing things to the supernatural was considered lazy and childish. I still feel that way, and I'm sure there's an explanation for this, but I've never been able to come up with one. Neither have the people who know about it. Nothing like this had ever happened to me as a child, and I don't remember even hearing stories from the old people in my family about anything unexplained, or spooky, or mysterious, or anyone even suggesting as much. And this was probably super anticlimactic for you, reader, but this is an absolutely true story that happened to me, and has not been embellished in any way. Like I said, it's really hard to convey the malice surrounding the whole event without writing a novella. I'll never forget the way my cats looked towards the kitchen when we heard the crash. I've long since given up actively trying to figure it out, but if you have anything to add, I'm certainly listening.
It was the summer of 2000, and I was working second shift about an hour away from home. I was 18, and it was my first real job after leaving high school, and I was getting paid pretty decent money for the time. I actually liked the drive most nights. It was a long stretch of highway once I got out of the city, and it gave me some time to unwind and decompress from my shift. I had made the drive every night for a few months, so it was very familiar, and most of the time I was pretty much on autopilot. I always joked that the car knew the way home. One night in particular stands out, and I will never forget this as long as I live. It was particularly clear that night, with a bright full moon hiding behind the hills on the side of the valley. I had just gotten to the shale cliffs outside of the town of Cortland, about a half-hour south of Syracuse, New York. I had been on autopilot, as previously mentioned, and suddenly remarked to myself how it was weird I hadn't seen any other vehicles on the drive that night. That bothered me just a tiny bit, because I normally saw at least one or two, either heading north or south, at that time of night. I noticed at the time, too, that my music wasn't playing. That didn't strike me as too odd, because this was the era of portable CD players and tape adapters, so I figured that my batteries were dead and that I forgot to plug in the adapter. I heard very little besides the hum of the engine in my decrepit late 80s Buick and the wind noise at 70 miles per hour, until I rounded the last bend before the village of Homer. I hadn't seen any vehicles, but now I heard another one. Somewhere very close was a classic muscle car, brandishing a very throaty V8 engine. That was when the headlights appeared behind me. They didn't come around the bend, they just turned on, maybe 4 car lengths away. They were piercingly bright, actually causing me to squint as they got closer. I gripped the wheel with every bit of strength I had, expecting to get rear-ended at any second. The car got so close that I couldn't even see the lights behind me, but I was still having trouble seeing because of how bright they were. I tried not to panic as my heart pounded away. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I tried my best to remain calm. I held my speed, and after a few seconds that felt like an eternity, the car whipped into the passing lane and rocketed past me like I was standing still. The car just got past my front bumper and moved back over right in front of me, and then slammed on their brakes. I clenched the wheel so hard that my knuckles cracked. I let out a string of obscenities that would have offended a sailor and waited to rear-end the car. But the instant my bumper should have made contact, the car disappeared. Not just gone. Not that they floored it and were messing with me either. The car became a cloud of black smoke and soot, lit by my headlights and the hellish red glow that were the brake lights. I drove through the cloud and felt nothing but pure dread. But luckily, I didn't lose control or run into anything. I got off the highway at the next exit, which I was going to do anyway, but instead of heading home, I stopped by a friend's house that was not too far out of the way, because I was so freaked out that I didn't want to drive anymore for a while. As soon as I walked in his door, he looked as scared as I was and said, "Dude, did you just see a ghost?" Fair warning to anyone in upstate New York. If you're on 81 South on a summer night under a full moon, something else is out there with you.
I used to live in a very old house, built in the late 1800s. The basement was all dirt, and if you looked up at the ceiling, there were actual tree trunks put in it to hold the floor up. I remember when we first moved in, there was a closet, and in the back was a small wooden door or hatch. I opened it and couldn't see very well in there because it was too dark. I got a flashlight, but there was no floor on the other end and seemed just like a big hole. I didn't think of it much until later when my school went to visit the town library about the Underground Railroad, and my house was part of it. I asked one of the librarians about what I had found, and she said it could have been where they hid slaves. Pretty awesome, I thought. Anyways, before all that, weird things constantly happened in the house. There's so many stories I could talk about, but for the sake of space, I'll just tell you 5 of them. I had a Super Nintendo at this time, and I had left the controller just hanging. The system sat on top of the entertainment center, which was high enough for the controller to hang and not touch the ground. Well, my dad and I were sitting there. He was reading the paper. I was doing homework, when all of a sudden, the controller swung from left to right a few times, and then stopped as if someone grabbed it, swung it, and then grabbed it again to stop it. 2. I was sleeping in the living room one night, around 12 or so. I began hearing a high-pitched voice. I sat up and tried to listen carefully. It was getting louder and clearer. Eventually, I understood it. It sounded like a group of kids screaming, "Mommy, why? Oh, Mommy, why?" Freaked the crap out of me. I called for my mother in the room and asked her if she could hear it. Her, being an extreme Christian lady, tried to say it was something else. But I could tell, when she first came out of her room, her jaw dropped, and I could see the horror in her face. Upstairs was my room, and it was the biggest room in the house. But you had to walk through my room to get to the other rooms. After you walk through my room, there's a small hallway, which split off into 2 separate rooms. No one was up there with me at that time. In the hallway, I heard someone walking, because the floor would creak at times. I stood up to look, but I didn't see anything. A few minutes later, I heard again, and stood there watching. I could actually see the floorboards move, as if someone was stepping on them. Later that day, my grandfather came over, and he slept in the room down the hall. He woke up in the middle of the night, and came to my room to wake me up, and told me the dresser in the room lifted up and came back down. I went with him to the room and looked, and we figured out it was one of the floor panels in the hallway. When you step on it, the dresser would move. Well, everyone was asleep that night, so whoever it was I heard earlier and saw the floorboards move was walking the hall again that night. Again, in my room, one night, I was laying in bed, had the lights off, and the hall light was on. So this way here in the middle of the night, I could see to go downstairs to use the bathroom. As I'm laying there, I felt something at the foot of my bed, and when I looked, there was a dark shadow. Now the room is already dark, but it was lit dimly from the hallway light. But this part, at the foot of my bed, roughly the size of a person, was standing there, and I felt like I was being watched. After what seemed like 5 minutes, it started to fade away. Before it was fully gone, I heard something barely whisper my name, Christopher. Freaking me out yet again, I turned my light on but saw nothing. Last but not least, not the greatest story, but my brother and I were in our living room watching TV. Now at this time, I've seen and heard things but my brother had not. We're sitting there, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dark slowly walk by the open doorway of the adjacent room. I thought it was just me, but my little brother freaked out and screamed, "Did you just see that?" He ran to our mother and kept telling her he saw someone walk by the door, but of course, she shrugged it off.
I will start by saying that the following encounter is my own story, and as real as it gets. The story takes place in Michigan in the late 90s. I am 26 now, but was a young 8-year-old then. It was Hallows Eve, or the Devil's Night for some, and I had chosen to stay at my grandma's this night. Now for a little background as to why this plays an important role. It was an old Victorian home that was once an infirmary, and bodies that family members did not claim had been buried in the basement. The lone area of dirt in the furthest corner could tell 100 stories. But hey, they got a 5.5 bedroom, 3-story Victorian home for cheap. Who can complain? There have been numerous paranormal activities reported by my family, ranging from hearing voices, being choked in their sleep, and things being moved around at night. I would soon experience my first, but not my last. After getting ready for sleep, my two brothers and myself had climbed into bed to finally catch some shut-eye. While I was sleeping, I suddenly had the urge to awake, almost as if my alarm had gone off in my brain. I would soon find out why. There it stood, within reaching distance of my 8-year-old arms. There was a figure. Now I would imagine it was much taller than myself, but from where I lay, it may as well have been a giant. It made no sounds nor motion. So I took the opportunity to kick my brother, who lay at the feet of my bed. This effort would prove useless, so there I remained, paralyzed with fear. I am only able to ever so slightly shift my eyes. As I do, I would soon regret it, for upon my eyes there was an even greater horror. Outside the window, where I expected to see the moon illuminating, hovered an eyeball instead. No, not a human-sized one. Literally, where the moon would usually lay claim to the night, a giant eyeball had eclipsed it. My eyelids slammed shut, and I didn't fall asleep for the rest of the night. I am finally relieved, however, when I see the subtle orange glow through my eyelids. The terror was over. I had made it through the night. Believe this story or don't. My voice still quivers when this story leaves my lips. If anyone else has seen this eye, please let me know what it may have been.
Several years ago, I had an overnight babysitting gig. At about 11 p.m., I would arrive at my client's house as they were leaving for work. Their son was only 9 and already asleep long before I showed up, and all I had to do was sleep in the guest room. Since he was under 13, he could not be alone in the house, so I was just around to make sure the place didn't burn down, essentially. Pretty sweet gig. The only downside was that the house wasn't in too great of a neighborhood. One night, a few nights before Halloween, I get a call from the mom saying she has to leave a few hours early, asking if I could come in ASAP. I was on the other side of town, but could easily be there in about 45 minutes. She had to leave right away, so the kid was going to be alone for about 35 to 40 minutes, but since it was kind of a dire situation, she said it was fine. It never happened before or after, so it wasn't a big deal. So I drive across town and make it into their place in a decent time, and as I am parked in front of the house and gathering my things to take inside, I see a cat out of the corner of my vision. As I'm getting out, this cat starts rubbing my legs, weaving in and out of them, and following me as I begin up the walk. Now, this family didn't have a cat. The son was super allergic, and I had never seen him before, even after working there for over a year. But I didn't think much of it at this time. As I walk past the gate and their front fence, this painter's van pulls up. You know the ones, white, no windows, super sketchy. The back door opens, and these two guys kinda hop out and ask me for directions to the nearest gas station. I point them where to go, down 2 blocks, over 4, and the guy driving rolls down his window and asks if I could just hop in and show him. Remember the cat? He fucking zooms out from behind me, runs under the fence, and starts doing that horrible shrieking noise cats make when they are engaged in battle in the dead of night, right outside your goddamn window. The cat doesn't stop. This fluffy little bastard fucking jumps one of the guys, climbs his leg like a fucking tree, and starts clawing the ever-loving shit out of him. The guy freaks, obviously, starts screaming, and he and his buddy dive for cover in the van, speeding off with the doors still open. Then, like it was the normalest thing ever, the cat walks right back up the pathway and comes to sit at my feet. I pet him, kinda scared I was gonna be next, but he just takes his ear scratches and purrs for me before bounding off toward the backyard. Weird as shit, right? I honestly thought I was crazy, so I tried to push it from my mind. Yeah, well, it gets fucked up. About a week later, a woman about my age and build ends up missing, and local reports mentioned seeing a white, unmarked painter's van in the neighborhood. Of course, I called the cops, and they came and took my statement, but I never heard anything back about it. I left out the part with the cat in my story, but I've always secretly attributed my safety that night to the strange cat. I never saw him in the neighborhood again, either. I've never really had cause to share the story before, but with Halloween so near, it always comes to mind. One of the only other people I've told the story to was the mom, and she's convinced it was some guardian angel. I don't believe in anything like that, but I really don't have a better explanation as to why it seemed I was saved from a kidnapping by a strange, unknown house cat.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to take a moment to thank my amazing friend, Killer Orange Cat. You know, when I started this channel 2 years ago, he was probably the only big channel who agreed to collaborate with me, and actually helped me grow as a narrator. He has helped me a lot during these 2 years, and I am so profoundly grateful for his help. He is an amazing friend and content creator, and even now does so much for smaller channels to help give them exposure and help them grow. If you enjoyed his narrations, I implore you to check out his phenomenal channel. His stories are always original and have never been read before on any other channels, as well as being seriously creepy. I've left a link on screen now to his latest video. Please check out his works. Let him know that Mort sent you in the comments section. I know he will impress you. Again, thank you everyone for 70k. You have no idea how much it means to me. You are all awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.